Sarah stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her wedding dress for the 100th time that morning. The ivory silk felt heavy against her curves, and she could hear the whispers from the next room growing louder. Her mother rushed in, face flushed with panic and embarrassment. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk," her mother said, closing the door behind her. The look in her eyes told Sarah everything she needed to know before the words even came out. "He's not coming, is he?" Sarah asked quietly, her hands still smoothing down the fabric of her dress. She had spent months planning this wedding, choosing every detail carefully, dreaming of the moment she would walk down the aisle to meet David. Her mother's silence was answer enough. Sarah sank into the chair, still wearing her wedding dress, still holding her bouquet of white roses. The guests were already seated in the church, the photographer was waiting, and the reception hall was decorated with hundreds of flowers she had personally selected. His mother called. Her mother finally whispered. "She said David couldn't go through with it. She said he realized you two weren't compatible." Sarah knew what that really meant. She had heard the comments from David's family throughout their engagement. Comments about her size, about how she would look in wedding photos, about whether she was really the right choice for their successful son. David had always defended her, or so she thought. The bridesmaids knocked softly on the door. Sarah's best friend Emma entered first, her face showing a mixture of anger and sadness. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. David is a complete fool. You look absolutely beautiful." Sarah stood up slowly, looking at herself one more time in the mirror. She did look beautiful. The dress fit her perfectly, accentuating her figure in all the right ways. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled elegantly. She had never felt more ready to start a new chapter of her life. "What do we do now?" Emma asked. "Do you want me to tell the guests?" Sarah thought for a moment. All those people had taken time out of their lives to celebrate what they thought would be the happiest day of hers. Her grandmother had traveled from across the country. Her college friends had flown in from different states. The church was full of people who loved her and wanted to support her. "No," Sarah said firmly. "I'll tell them myself." She walked out of the bridal room, through the church hallways, and stood at the entrance to the sanctuary. Every head turned as she appeared in her wedding dress. The confused murmur that rippled through the crowd grew quiet as she walked down the aisle alone. Standing at the altar where David should have been, Sarah faced the congregation. Her voice was clear and strong when she spoke. "Thank you all for being here today. As you can see, there's been a change of plans. David has decided he cannot marry me today." The gasps and angry murmurs from the crowd made her feel both embarrassed and strangely empowered. These people cared about her. They were outraged on her behalf. "I want you all to know that I'm going to be okay," she continued. "I'm sad and disappointed, but I'm not broken. I know my worth, and someday I'll find someone who sees it too." After the ceremony that wasn't, Sarah's family and friends gathered around her. Many were crying, some were angry, all were supportive. Her uncle suggested they should sue David for the wedding expenses. Her cousin wanted to find David and give him a piece of her mind, but Sarah felt something unexpected growing inside her as the day went. Unrelief. She realized that if David could abandon her on their wedding day because of what other people thought about her appearance, then maybe she was lucky to discover his true character now, rather than after years of marriage. That evening, still in her wedding dress, Sarah sat in her apartment eating leftover wedding cake with Emma. "You know what?" she said between bites. "I think I dodged a bullet." Emma laughed through her tears. "You're the strongest person I know, Sarah. David just lost the best thing that ever happened to him." As Sarah finally took off her wedding dress that night, she made herself a promise. She would never again allow someone to make her feel like she wasn't enough. She would wait for someone who loved every part of her, inside and out. She didn't know it yet, but that someone was closer than she thought. 3 months after the wedding that never happened, Sarah found herself starting to rebuild her life in ways she never expected. The initial embarrassment had faded, replaced by a growing sense of freedom. She had moved to a new apartment across town, away from the memories and the pitying looks from neighbors who knew her story. Her new neighborhood was quiet and friendly. Sarah discovered a small coffee shop called Morning Brew, just 2 blocks from her apartment. It became her daily routine to stop there before work, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere and the genuinely kind staff who knew her by name within a week. It was there that she first noticed him. He sat alone at a corner table every morning, reading a newspaper and drinking black coffee. He was probably in his late 30s, with kind eyes and graying hair at his temples. He always wore simple, clean clothes and had a gentle way of thanking the baristas that made Sarah smile. Their first interaction was purely accidental. Sarah had been fumbling with her purse, trying to balance her coffee and laptop bag, when she bumped into his table. Coffee splashed everywhere, soaking his newspaper and dripping onto his shirt. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," Sarah exclaimed, grabbing napkins from the nearby counter. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment as she tried to clean up the mess. "It's perfectly fine," the man said with a warm smile. "Really, don't worry about it." His voice was calm and reassuring, without any trace of annoyance. "I was done reading anyway." "Please let me buy you another coffee," Sarah insisted. "And maybe pay for dry cleaning your shirt?" He chuckled softly. "A fresh coffee would be nice, but the shirt will be fine. I'm Thomas, by the way." "Sarah," she replied, feeling slightly less mortified. "I promise I'm not usually this clumsy." "Well, actually, that might be a lie." Thomas laughed, and the sound was so genuine that Sarah found herself relaxing. "We all have our moments. I once spilled an entire pot of coffee on myself right before an important meeting. Had to give my presentation looking like I'd been in a coffee fight." As Sarah waited for Thomas's replacement coffee, they began talking. She learned that he worked as a librarian at the city's main branch, that he had lived in the neighborhood for 5 years, and that he came to Morning Brew every day because he enjoyed the quiet morning routine. "What about you?" Thomas asked as they settled at his table, now cleaned of coffee residue. "Do you work nearby?" Sarah explained that she was a graphic designer at a small marketing firm downtown. She had always loved art and creativity, and her job allowed her to express that passion while making a living. As they talked, she realized how easy it was to speak with Thomas. He listened carefully to everything she said, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. When Sarah finally looked at her watch, she realized she was running late for work. "I'm so sorry, I have to run," she said, gathering her things quickly. "Of course," Thomas said, standing politely. "It was really nice meeting you, Sarah. I hope you have a good day." "You too," she replied, then paused at the door. "Maybe I'll see you here again tomorrow?" "I'll be here," Thomas said with a smile. Same time, same table. That became their routine. Every morning, Sarah would stop by Morning Brew, and if Thomas was there, they would share a few minutes of conversation before she headed to work. She learned that he was a widower, that his wife had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier, and that he found comfort in small, consistent routines like his morning coffee. Thomas never asked about Sarah's personal life beyond general questions about her work and interests, but she found herself wanting to share more with him. He had a way of making her feel heard and valued that she hadn't experienced in a long time. When she mentioned loving old movies, he recommended several classics she had never seen. When she talked about struggling with a difficult client at work, he offered practical advice without being pushy. One rainy morning, when Thomas wasn't at his usual table, Sarah surprised herself by feeling disappointed. She realized she had begun looking forward to their brief conversations more than she cared to admit. The coffee shop felt empty without his gentle presence. The next day, when she saw him back in his usual spot, Sarah felt a flutter of happiness that caught her off guard. As she approached his table with her coffee, Thomas looked up with a smile that seemed brighter than usual. "I missed our chat yesterday," he said simply. "Me too," Sarah admitted, sitting down across from him. She realized that somewhere in their daily conversations, she had begun to develop feelings for this kind, thoughtful man who saw her as simply Sarah, not as the woman who had been abandoned at the altar or judged for her appearance. For the first time since David left her, Sarah felt the possibility of something new and beautiful beginning to bloom in her life. As spring turned into summer, Sarah's morning conversations with Thomas had evolved into something deeper than casual coffee shop chit-chat. They had begun taking walks in the nearby park after their coffee, and Thomas had invited her to a poetry reading at the library where he worked. Sarah discovered that beneath his quiet exterior was a man with a rich inner life, someone who appreciated literature, art, and meaningful conversation. One Saturday morning, Sarah arrived at Morning Brew to find Thomas already waiting with 2 cups of coffee and a small paper bag. "I took the liberty of ordering for you," he said with a slightly nervous smile. "Vanilla latte with an extra shot, right?" "Perfect," Sarah laughed. "You know my coffee order better than most of my friends." "I also brought something else," Thomas said, sliding the paper bag across the table. "I know you mentioned loving chocolate croissants, and the bakery next to the library makes the best ones in the city." Sarah felt her heart flutter as she opened the bag. It was such a simple gesture, but it showed that Thomas had been listening to her, remembering small details about what she enjoyed. "Thomas, you didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," he said simply. "I've been thinking about our conversations, Sarah, about how much I enjoy spending time with you." There was something different in his tone that made Sarah look up from the croissant. Thomas was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before, nervous but hopeful. "I was wondering," he continued, "if you might like to have dinner with me sometime. Not just coffee and a quick chat before work, but a real evening together." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had been hoping Thomas might ask, but she had also been terrified that he would. Dating felt scary after what had happened with David. "I would like that very much," she heard herself say. Their first real date was at a small Italian restaurant that Thomas had chosen carefully. "The food is excellent," he explained as they walked in, "but it's also quiet enough that we can actually talk to each other." Over dinner, Sarah learned more about Thomas's life. He had been married to his college sweetheart Maria for 12 years before she became ill. They had tried to have children but weren't able to, which had brought them closer together rather than driving them apart. After Maria died, Thomas had thrown himself into his work at the library and his volunteer activities, but he admitted to Sarah that he had been lonely. "I never thought I would want to date again," Thomas said over dessert. "Maria and I had such a complete partnership that the idea of starting over with someone new felt impossible. But then I met you and everything changed." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I never thought I would trust anyone again after what happened with my ex-fiancé," she said. "But you make me feel safe, Thomas. You make me feel like myself." "Tell me about him," Thomas said gently. "Only if you want to. I can see that it still hurts you." Sarah had avoided talking about David with anyone except her closest friends, but something about Thomas's patient, non-judgmental presence made her want to share. She told him about the engagement, about David's family's comments about her weight, about being abandoned on her wedding day. "He left you at the altar?" Thomas's voice was filled with genuine disbelief and anger. "Sarah, I cannot imagine how anyone could do that to another human being, let alone someone as wonderful as you." "His family thought I wasn't good enough," Sarah said quietly. "They thought I was too heavy, too ordinary for their successful son." Thomas reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Sarah, look at me," he said firmly. "You are beautiful. Not despite your size, not in spite of anything about you, but because of who you are. Anyone who can't see that is blind and foolish." Sarah felt something inside her chest break open in the best possible way. Thomas wasn't just saying pretty words to make her feel better. He meant every word, and she could see the sincerity in his eyes. After dinner, Thomas walked Sarah to her apartment building. They stood outside her door, both reluctant for the evening to end. "Sarah," Thomas said, taking both of her hands in his, "I want you to know that I'm not looking for casual dating. I'm at a point in my life where I know what I want. I want partnership, commitment, someone to build a life with. If that's not what you're looking for, I understand. But I wanted to be honest." Sarah looked at this kind, honest man who had already shown her more respect and genuine care than David had in 2 years of dating. "It's exactly what I'm looking for," she said. Thomas smiled and leaned down to kiss her forehead gently. "Then let's see where this goes," he said. "I have a feeling it's going to be somewhere wonderful." As Sarah watched Thomas walk away, she realized that for the first time since her disastrous wedding day, she felt hopeful about love again. Thomas saw her, really saw her, and loved what he saw. She was beginning to understand that what had happened with David wasn't about her worth as a person. It was about David's inability to see past surface things to the real treasure that was right in front of him. Over the next few months, Sarah and Thomas's relationship blossomed in ways that surprised them both. Unlike her relationship with David, which had often felt like she was trying to fit into someone else's idea of who she should be, being with Thomas felt natural and effortless. He loved her sense of humor, her creativity, her kindness, and her strength. Thomas introduced Sarah to his world gradually and thoughtfully. He took her to book clubs at the library, community theater performances, and quiet art galleries. Sarah discovered that she loved this gentler pace of life, so different from the flashy social scene that David had preferred. With Thomas, she could be completely herself without worrying about impressing anyone or meeting impossible standards. One evening, while they were cooking dinner together in Thomas's cozy kitchen, Sarah noticed a framed photo on the refrigerator that she hadn't seen before. It showed a beautiful woman with dark hair and a radiant smile, standing next to a younger version of Thomas. "That's Maria," Thomas said, noticing Sarah's glance. He didn't seem uncomfortable or defensive, just matter of fact. "I hope it doesn't bother you that I keep her picture up." Sarah studied the photo carefully. Maria had been lovely, with the kind of classic beauty that would turn heads anywhere. For a moment, Sarah felt the familiar pang of insecurity that had plagued her throughout her relationship with David. But then she looked at Thomas, who was stirring pasta sauce and humming quietly. Completely at ease. "She was beautiful," Sarah said honestly. "Tell me about her." Thomas smiled, his eyes growing soft with memory. "She was. But more than that, she was brilliant and funny and had the biggest heart of anyone I ever knew. She volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend, and she could make friends with anyone within 5 minutes of meeting them." "You must miss her terribly," Sarah said. "I do." Thomas nodded. "I always will. But Maria taught me something important about love. She used to say that love isn't like a pie where you have to divide it into smaller pieces for each person. Love grows. The more you give, the more you have." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears, but they were good tears. "She sounds like an amazing woman." She was. "And she would have loved you," Thomas said, turning to face Sarah fully. "She would have loved your laugh, your artistic eye, the way you notice small, beautiful things that other people miss. She would have been so happy to know that I found someone who makes me smile again." That night, as they sat on Thomas's couch watching an old movie, Sarah realized something profound. She wasn't competing with Maria's memory. Thomas had enough love for both the woman he had lost and the woman he was falling in love with now. This realization filled her with a peace she had never experienced in any relationship before. A few weeks later, Sarah faced her first real test of how solid their relationship was. David called her out of the blue on a Tuesday evening. Sarah stared at his name on her phone screen for several rings before finally answering. "Sarah?" David's voice sounded unsure and perhaps a little desperate. "I know I have no right to call you, but I needed to talk to you." "What do you want, David?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I made a mistake," David said. "The biggest mistake of my life. I should never have listened to my family. I should never have left you. I've been miserable without you, Sarah. I want to try again." Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her had fantasized about this moment for months after the wedding, imagining David realizing his error and begging for her forgiveness. But now that it was actually happening, she felt mostly sadness for him. "David," she said gently, "I'm seeing someone now, someone who loves me exactly as I am." "But Sarah, we had 2 years together. We were going to get married. That has to mean something." "It does mean something," Sarah agreed. "It means I learned what I deserve in a relationship. I deserve someone who won't abandon me when things get difficult. I deserve someone who sees my worth and isn't ashamed to show the world that they love me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, David spoke again, his voice small. "Is it too late? Is there any chance for us?" Sarah looked around her apartment at the flowers Thomas had brought her the day before, at the book of poetry he had lent her, at the drawing she had made of him reading in the coffee shop. "Yes, David, it's too late. I hope you find happiness, but it won't be with me." After she hung up, Sarah sat quietly for a few minutes, processing the conversation. She realized that she felt no anger toward David anymore, just a deep gratitude that he had shown his true character before they were married, rather than after. When Thomas came over an hour later for their planned evening together, Sarah told him about the phone call. She watched his face carefully, looking for signs of jealousy or insecurity, but Thomas just listened thoughtfully. "How do you feel?" he asked when she finished. "Free," Sarah said, surprising herself with the honesty of her answer. "Completely free. I realized that what David and I had wasn't real love. Real love doesn't waver when people criticize or when things get complicated." Thomas pulled her into his arms. "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "Real love sees the whole person and chooses them every single day." As Sarah settled into Thomas's embrace, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found something with him that was deeper and more genuine than anything she had ever experienced before. 6 months into their relationship, Sarah realized that what she felt for Thomas had grown into something deeper than she had ever experienced. It wasn't the desperate, anxious love she had felt for David, where she was constantly worried about measuring up or keeping his attention. This was steady, secure, and joyful. She woke up each morning excited to see Thomas, not because she was afraid he might leave, but because being with him made her life brighter and more meaningful. Thomas seemed to feel the same way. He had begun introducing Sarah to his friends and colleagues, always with obvious pride and affection. At a library fundraising dinner, Sarah watched as Thomas spoke with genuine enthusiasm about her graphic design work to a group of donors. He bragged about her artistic talents the way other people bragged about promotions or achievements. "You're glowing," Thomas's colleague Janet whispered to Sarah during the cocktail hour. "I've known Thomas for 8 years and I've never seen him this happy. Maria would be so pleased to know he found love again." Sarah felt a warm flush of happiness. She had worried that Thomas's friends and colleagues might compare her to Maria, or feel like she was trying to replace someone irreplaceable. Instead, they welcomed her with open arms, clearly thrilled to see Thomas smile and laugh again. That evening, as they walked home from the dinner, Thomas took Sarah's hand and stopped walking suddenly. They were standing under a streetlight in front of a small neighborhood park, the same park where they had taken their first walk together months earlier. "Sarah," Thomas said, his voice unusually serious, "I need to tell you something." Sarah felt her heart skip, but not with anxiety. With anticipation. "I love you," Thomas said simply. "I'm completely, utterly in love with you. I love your kindness, your creativity, your strength, your beautiful laugh. I love the way you see the world and the way you make me see it differently too. I love how patient you are with the elderly patrons at the library when they need help with computers. I love how you hum when you're concentrating on your art. I love everything about you." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "I love you too, Thomas. So much that it scares me sometimes." "Why does it scare you?" Thomas asked gently, reaching up to wipe away her tears. "Because I've never felt anything like this before," Sarah admitted. "With David, I was always trying to be someone else, someone I thought he would love more. With you, I get to be completely myself and you love me anyway. It feels too good to be true." Thomas cupped her face in his hands. "Sarah, listen to me. This is what real love feels like. It feels safe and exciting at the same time. It feels like coming home. You're not too good to be true. You're exactly what I've been hoping for without even knowing it." They stood there holding each other under the streetlight, and Sarah felt something settle deep in her soul. This was what she had been searching for all her life without realizing it. Not someone who would tolerate her or settle for her, but someone who genuinely treasured her. A month later, Thomas surprised Sarah with a weekend trip to a small coastal town 2 hours away. They stayed in a charming bed and breakfast overlooking the ocean, spent their days walking on the beach and browsing through antique shops, and their evenings sitting on the porch watching the sunset. On their last evening there, as they sat on a bench overlooking the water, Thomas grew quiet and thoughtful. Sarah could sense that something was on his mind, but she had learned to give him space to gather his thoughts. "Sarah," Thomas said finally, "I've been thinking about our future together." "Oh?" Sarah said, trying to keep her voice casual despite the racing of her heart. "I know we've only been together for 7 months," Thomas continued, "but at my age I don't see the point in waiting when I know what I want. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to come home to you every evening. I want to share holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday afternoons with you for the rest of my life." Sarah turned to face him fully, her breath catching in her throat. "I'm not asking you to marry me right now," Thomas said quickly. "I want you to be sure to take all the time you need, but I want you to know that's where my heart is. I want to build a life with you, Sarah. A real, lasting, beautiful life." Sarah felt overwhelmed with emotion after being abandoned by someone who claimed to love her. The idea that Thomas was already thinking about forever felt both thrilling and terrifying. "I want that too," she said softly. "I want it more than I've ever wanted anything. But Thomas, are you sure? Are you sure about me?" Thomas smiled and pulled her closer. "Sarah, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You are the most wonderful thing that has happened to me in years. I thank God every day that you spilled coffee on my newspaper." Sarah laughed through her tears. I should spill coffee more often. Please don't, Thomas said, kissing her forehead. I don't think my wardrobe could handle it. As they sat watching the sun set over the ocean, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace and certainty. Thomas wasn't just talking about marriage as some abstract future possibility. He was talking about a partnership, a real commitment to building something beautiful together. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly ready for that kind of love. 2 months after their beach weekend, Sarah was having lunch with her best friend Emma when the topic of marriage came up again. Emma had been watching Sarah's relationship with Thomas with growing amazement and approval. "You two are disgustingly happy," Emma said with a grin. "I mean that in the best possible way. The difference between how you are now and how you were with David is like night and day." "I know," Sarah said, unable to stop smiling. "Sometimes I wake up and can't believe this is my life. Thomas makes everything better just by being there." "So when is he going to propose?" Emma asked bluntly. "Because that man is clearly head over heels in love with you, and you light up like a Christmas tree every time someone mentions his name." Sarah blushed. "We've talked about the future, but I don't want to rush anything. After what happened with David, I want to be absolutely sure about everything." "Sarah," Emma said seriously, "Thomas is nothing like David. David was selfish and shallow. Thomas sees you, really sees you, and loves what he sees. Don't let David's stupidity make you afraid to grab onto something beautiful." That evening, Sarah was working on a freelance design project in her apartment when Thomas knocked on her door. She opened it to find him standing there with a nervous expression and a small velvet box in his hand. Sarah's heart stopped. "Thomas?" "I know I said I wouldn't pressure you," Thomas said, his words coming out in a rush. "I know I said you could take all the time you need. But Sarah, I can't wait anymore. Not because I'm impatient, but because I'm so sure about us that waiting feels like wasting time we could be spending as husband and wife." Sarah stared at the small box, her mind racing. This was really happening. Thomas was really proposing. "Sarah Martinez," Thomas said, dropping to one knee right there in her doorway. "Will you marry me? Not because you're settling or because it's the next logical step, but because I love you with my whole heart, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how precious you are to me." Sarah looked down at this wonderful man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her through it all. Thomas, who brought her coffee every morning just the way she liked it. Thomas, who listened to her talk about her work projects with genuine interest. Thomas, who made her feel beautiful and cherished every single day. "Yes," Sarah whispered, then louder. "Yes, Thomas. Of course, yes." Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. It was perfect. A simple solitaire diamond that caught the light beautifully. Not too flashy, not too traditional, just right for who Sarah was. "I picked it out myself," Thomas said, standing up and pulling her into his arms. "The jeweler showed me dozens of rings, but this one reminded me of you. Classic, beautiful, and absolutely perfect." Sarah examined the ring more closely and felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Thomas, it's the most beautiful ring I've ever seen." "Not as beautiful as the woman wearing it," Thomas said. And Sarah knew he meant every word. They spent the evening calling their friends and family to share the news. Sarah's mother cried happy tears over the phone. Thomas's colleagues at the library were thrilled. Emma screamed so loudly that Sarah had to hold the phone away from her ear. "I'm so happy for you," Emma said when she finally calmed down. "You deserve this, Sarah. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are." Later that night, as they lay in bed together, Sarah turned to Thomas with a question that had been nagging at her. "Thomas," she said quietly, "are you sure you want to marry me soon? We could have a long engagement if you want to be completely certain." Thomas propped himself up on his elbow and looked at her seriously. "Sarah, I've already lost too many years to grief and loneliness. I don't want to lose any more time that I could be spending as your husband. But if you need more time, I understand." Sarah thought about it carefully. With David, she had needed a long engagement because some part of her had sensed that something wasn't right. With Thomas, everything felt right. Every instinct told her that this man would love and cherish her for the rest of their lives. "I don't need more time," Sarah said firmly. "I want to marry you as soon as possible." Thomas smiled and kissed her softly. "How does next month sound?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Next month?" "Thomas, we can't plan a wedding in a month." "Why not?" Thomas asked. "We don't need anything fancy. We just need our friends and family, someone to officiate, and each other. Everything else is just decoration." Sarah thought about her first wedding planning experience, the months of stress over flowers and venues and guest lists. None of that had mattered in the end. What mattered was marrying someone who truly loved her. "You're right," she said, surprising herself. "Let's do it. Let's get married next month." Thomas's face lit up with joy. "Really?" "Really," Sarah confirmed. "I've already wasted enough time not being married to you." As they began making simple plans for their small, intimate wedding, Sarah felt a deep sense of rightness about everything. This wasn't about having the perfect dress or the perfect venue. This was about making a commitment to the man who had shown her what real love looked like. And that was worth more than any elaborate celebration could ever be. 4 weeks later, Sarah stood in the small garden behind the public library where Thomas worked, wearing a simple cream-colored dress that she had chosen because it made her feel beautiful and confident. The ceremony was tiny, just 20 people who truly mattered to both of them. Emma stood beside Sarah as her maid of honor, while Thomas's brother served as his best man. The setting was perfect in its simplicity. Thomas had arranged for the library's garden to be decorated with white roses and fairy lights. A small string quartet played softly in the background. Everything felt intimate and personal, exactly the opposite of the elaborate spectacle Sarah had planned with David. As the music changed to signal the start of the ceremony, Sarah felt a moment of déjà vu. Once again, she was walking toward an altar in a wedding dress. But this time, everything was different. This time, she could see Thomas waiting for her with a smile so full of love and joy that it took her breath away. Thomas had chosen to write his own vows, and when it came time for him to speak, his voice was strong and clear. "Sarah, a year ago I thought my chance for love had passed. I thought I would spend the rest of my life with only memories of what happiness felt like. Then you spilled coffee on my newspaper and changed everything." Sarah laughed through her tears, remembering that first awkward meeting that had led to everything beautiful that followed. "You taught me that love doesn't end when we lose someone we care about," Thomas continued. "Love grows. It multiplies. It finds new ways to surprise us and fill our lives with joy. Sarah, you are my second chance at happiness, but you're not my second choice. You're exactly who I was meant to find. I promise to love you, support you, and cherish you for all the days of my life." When it was Sarah's turn, she looked into Thomas's eyes and spoke from her heart. "Thomas, you saved me from believing that I wasn't worthy of real love. You showed me what it feels like to be truly seen and valued for who I am. You never tried to change me or make me smaller to fit into your life. Instead, you made your life bigger to include all of me. I promise to love you with the same generosity and acceptance you've shown me every day." The officiant, a friend of Thomas's from the library, pronounced them husband and wife. When Thomas kissed Sarah, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was what a wedding was supposed to feel like, pure joy and celebration of love. The reception was held in the library's main hall, transformed with candles and flowers into something magical. Instead of a formal dinner, they had set up stations with all of Thomas and Sarah's favorite foods. People mingled freely, sharing stories and laughter. Sarah's mother approached her during the reception, tears in her eyes. "Sweetheart, I owe you an apology," she said. "After what happened with David, I was so worried about you. I thought maybe you should lower your expectations, settle for someone safe. But watching you with Thomas, I see that you were right to wait for real love." "Thanks, Mom," Sarah said, hugging her mother tightly. "Thomas is safe, but he's also everything I ever dreamed of." Emma cornered the newlyweds during the cake cutting. "Okay, I have to ask," she said with a grin. "Thomas, what made you fall in love with Sarah so quickly?" Thomas didn't hesitate. "Everything," he said simply. "Her kindness to strangers, the way she notices beautiful details that other people miss, how she makes me laugh without even trying. But mostly it was how genuine she is. Sarah is exactly the same person whether she's talking to me, to you, or to the barista at the coffee shop. That kind of authenticity is rare and precious." Sarah felt her heart swell with love for this man who saw her so clearly, and loved what he saw. As the evening wound down, Sarah and Thomas found themselves alone for a moment on the library's front steps. The fairy lights twinkled around them, and Sarah could hear the distant sound of their guests inside still celebrating. "How do you feel, Mrs. Chen?" Thomas asked, using Sarah's new married name for the first time. "Perfect," Sarah said honestly. "Completely, utterly perfect. How do you feel, Mr. Chen?" Like the luckiest man alive, Thomas replied. Sarah, I want you to know something. When I married Maria, I thought I knew what love was. And I did for that time in my life. But what I feel for you is different, deeper. Maybe because I've learned how precious and fragile love can be. I don't take a single day with you for granted. Sarah looked at her new husband, this wonderful man who had seen past the hurt and rejection she carried, and loved her back to wholeness. Thomas, do you remember what you said to me the night we first said we loved each other? About love feeling like coming home? I remember. I finally understand what you meant, Sarah said. Being with you feels like coming home to myself. Like I can finally stop trying to be someone else and just be Sarah. And that's enough for you. That's more than enough, Thomas said, pulling her close. That's everything. As they walked back inside to rejoin their celebration, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been left at the altar by a man who couldn't see her worth. Tonight, she was married to a man who treasured every part of her. The abandonment that had felt like the end of her world had actually been the beginning of her real life. Sarah had learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you clears the path for the best thing. If David hadn't left her, she never would have moved to the neighborhood where she met Thomas. She never would have discovered what real unconditional love felt like. As she and Thomas cut their simple but beautiful cake together, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about their happiness, Sarah knew that she had found something worth waiting for. She had found a partner who would choose her every day, not despite who she was, but because of exactly who she was. Their love story hadn't started with a dramatic rescue or love at first sight. It had started with spilled coffee and grown through daily kindness, respect, and genuine affection. It was the kind of love that would last a lifetime, built on a foundation of true friendship and mutual admiration. Later that night, as they sat in their hotel room still wearing their wedding clothes, Sarah and Thomas made plans for their future. They talked about the house they wanted to buy, the trips they wanted to take, the quiet life they wanted to build together. Thomas, Sarah said as they finally prepared for bed, thank you for waiting for me to be ready. Thank you for being brave enough to love again, Thomas replied. And Sarah, thank you for teaching me that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most unexpected places. As Sarah fell asleep in her husband's arms, she smiled, thinking about how wrong people had been about her. She wasn't the woman who got left at the altar. She was the woman who found her perfect match and built a beautiful life with him. She was the woman who learned that real love doesn't judge or criticize or try to change you. Real love celebrates you exactly as you are and makes you feel like the most precious person in the world. And that's exactly what she had found with Thomas, her gentle librarian who had loved her from that very first cup of spilled coffee.